We are the Ministry of the Real Truth, and after uploading our videos on the said secret plot or secret plan of the Jesuit order, we came across this book in the public domain, public access. No copyright breach was intended, and all was brought through this video review for educational purposes alone. We found this book, Studies in the Spirituality of Jesuits. Saint Ignatius asks, "Are you sure you know who I am?" by Joseph Veal, S.J. Supposedly from the writings of Saint Ignatius himself. So this could reveal the real truth about the Jesuit order, totally squishing the conspiracy theories or the claims, or totally verifying that they are of evil intent and persuasion. Let's have a look at this book, shall we? The Seminar on Jesuit Spirituality. The seminar is composed of a number of Jesuits appointed from their provinces in the United States. It concerns itself with topics pertaining to the spiritual doctrine and practice of Jesuits, especially United States Jesuits, and communicates the results to the members of the provinces through its publication. Studies in the Spirituality of Jesuits. This is done in the spirit of Vatican II's recommendation that religious institutes recapture the original inspiration of their founders and adapt it to the circumstances of modern times. The seminar welcomes reactions or comments in regard to the material that it publishes. The seminar focuses its direct attention on the life and works of the Jesuits of the United States. The issues treated may be common also to Jesuits of other regions, to other priests, religious and laity, to both men and women. Hence, the journal, while meant especially for American Jesuits, is not exclusively for them. Others who may find it helpful are cordially welcome to make use of it. And current members of the seminar from 2001 onwards, or back. The opinions expressed in studies are those of the individual author thereof. Parenthesis, designate year of entry as a seminar member. Saint Ignatius asks, "Are you sure you know who I am?" Joseph Veal, S.J. Studies in the Spirituality of Jesuits, September 2001. Of all things, you may be interested in this example of what could never happen in the Society of Jesus, but did. At one time in the past, a Jesuit superior general appointed a novice to govern the Society of Jesus. Who was the general? Who was the novice? What were the circumstances? The answers to those questions you will find at the end of these remarks. So, no skipping ahead to them, please. As this author thanks members of the seminar who have completed their 3-year term, and he goes through that. And here surely is a place to recognise another person who 5 times a year for more than a dozen years now has done the copy editing of every study's manuscript. As you might imagine, those manuscripts come from writers each of whom has his own quirks, both positive and negative. He has also regularly prepared the camera-ready material that finally emerges as the copies of studies that you hold in your hands or you're reading. That man is John L. McCarthy, S.J., a member of the Wisconsin province and an associate editor at the Institute of Jesuit Sources. Without him, studies would not be what it is. And the author thanks this guy, John. Whatever one may presently think of the matter, Bishop Felix Davidek and Ludmila Javovrova most surely thought that on December 29, 1970, at Brno, Czechoslovakia, he ordained her to the Roman Catholic priesthood. This remarkable story has been told in a recently published book, Out of the Depths, by Miriam Teresa Winter, New York Crossroad, 2001, 260 paragraph. It is a deeply moving account of love and fidelity to the Church in the context of 40 years of communist persecution, of imagination and daring in the midst of danger and ambiguity, and above all, of extraordinary personal commitment. Because it is not a scholarly historical treatise, the book leaves the historian with questions to be answered and corroborative material to be provided. A full-blown scholarly study ought to be undertaken before documents vanish, memories fade, and participants die. But on its own merits, this book is very much worth reading and pondering. Felix Davidek, ordained a priest in 1945 at the beginning of the communist takeover of Czechoslovakia, later imprisoned, sometimes in solitary confinement, released and routinely under surveillance, nonetheless managed to found Koinotes, a clandestine community of committed Catholics. In 1967 he was validly but secretly ordained a bishop. As early as 1951 other bishops had been secretly ordained, among them 2 Jesuits. One of these, Jan Korek, is today Cardinal Bishop of Nitra in Slovakia. Javarova was amongst those most deeply involved in sustaining the Koinotes community and fostering the pastoral work of Davidek. In 1970, after a contentious meeting of Koinotes representatives who were divided on the question of woman priests, Davidek carried out the rite of ordination on Javarova. For 20 years, up to the Velvet Revolution and the fall of communism in Czechoslovakia, the Koinotes community carried on its work. Then news of unusual ordinations gradually came to the attention of church leaders in the West. They have since, to use an anodyne phrase, sought to regularize the situation. Ludmila Javarova only reluctantly made her story public in recent years. As told in this book, it is a story of both simplicity and complexity, of beauty and astonishing dignity. From the Institute of Jesuit Sources comes a new book, A Guide to Jesuit Archives, 10 plus 178 paragraphs, or maybe that's paraphrases, we believe that's paragraphs. It presents data on the official archives of the 90 provinces and independent regions of the Society of Jesus on every continent, as well as data on the Central or Roman archives of the Society. The book opens up and enhances research opportunities around the world for scholars and others in a great variety of fields. Another announcement of interest: did you know that the IJS has its own website, www.jesuitsources.com? It will give you the opportunity to order their publications online. Visit them there, and they'd be happy to welcome you. Did you jump ahead to the last paragraph? Did you guess or deduce or already know the answers to the questions in the first paragraph? The general was Saint Ignatius. The novice was Cristobal de Madrid. The circumstances were the increasingly frequent illnesses of Ignatius in 1556, the year of his death. Madrid, a priest, before entering the society in 1555, had been a friend of Ignatius and indeed a consultant or advisor to him for several years. After Madrid had been a novice for only a few days, Ignatius demonstrated his confidence in him by appointing him to work with André de Frau, the rector of the German college, to quell a sort of mutiny there among the students who had rebelled when Ignatius ordered them to speak Italian at the college rather than in native German. Apparently, Madrid pleased Ignatius by the skill in which he carried out this delicate mission, because in June of the next year, 1556, when Ignatius was so ill that he could no longer occupy himself with the work of general of the society, he temporarily turned over all his governance powers to Palenque and Madrid. That presented a problem, to say the least, because Ignatius had earlier named Nadal as Vicar General, and Borgia in Spain also seems to have had full governing powers, at least for that country. The situation became even more complicated, of course, when upon the death of Ignatius, Lyonnaise was elected Vicar General in accordance with the constitutions, but Lyonnaise was at this time on the point of death, and until his recovery he used Palenque and Madrid just as Ignatius had. When Lyonnaise later was elected the second general of the society, Madrid became one of the assistants. He was also, in 1556, the first Jesuit to write a book advocating frequent communion, a controversial position then and for the next several centuries, and one that brought considerable trouble to the society from the more rigorous theologians and prelates. John W. Padberg, S.J. Editor. Contents page. Appendix 1 and 2. And here's some more books available. Saint Ignatius asks, "Are you sure you know who I am?" A note to introduce what comes after. A few years ago, many years ago, in a fit of high spirits, the author wrote, Saint Ignatius speaks about Ignatian prayer, and there's a footnote indication. 1. See Studies in the Spirituality of Jesuits, 28, number 2, March 1996. Joseph Veal, S.J., a member of the Irish province, has taught English literature at Gonzaga College in Dublin and has been the director of the Tertianship program for the Irish province, as well as of the combined program for the Irish and British provinces of the Society. He has written extensively and worked in the field of Ignatian spirituality, directing the spiritual exercises in Europe, North America and Africa. He thought it might be illuminating to have him speak to us in a relaxed way, or to all in a relaxed way, as it were, conversationally. This is the kind of sequel it asks, how can we be sure we know the real Ignatius? How do we find the authentic original spirit? When it eventually becomes possible to write the history of Jesuit spirituality, it will have to show how the fortunes of a spiritual teaching like St. Ignatius's are influenced by the different culture it lives through, by the currents of secular mood and thinking, as well as by the religious culture of different times, by the spiritual traditions of different continents, by the Church's ever-changing self-understanding, by a dominant theological style, by the aspirations and needs of the people of God, by passing religious fashions, by the fears that move authorities, and by the deeper movements of the Spirit of God as well. It is sobering to glance at the variations of interpretation in the history of the Society that have arisen in the course of more than 4.5 centuries, just as has happened in the Church and in any human institution. If a new generation prides itself on getting it right, it can be helpfully chastened when it looks at history and observes how earlier dominant orthodoxies failed to question themselves or to listen to a different voice. It is good for us to stop from time to time and to ask each other, whom are we currently writing off? There are no static answers to questions of historical authenticity. These words of Friar John W. O'Malley are the conclusion and the beginning of these reflections. To highlight that borrowing from him is to say how much these musings are indebted to all his writings and shared conversation. He is not guilty of the misuses of his wisdom. Conversations lets us move with a certain ease from one train of thought to another. We are not under constraint to present a structural argument. When we do, the company dozes or falls into a sleep. Conversations invites a kind of musing on things and does not lend itself to a text broken up into divisions and subdivisions. Instead, ideal flow, as it were, in and out of each other. They interweave and surprise us by what they recall or suggest. They take off in unplanned directions. Conversation is allowed to meander or to retrace its steps. It invites us to go back on our tracks, to take up something we asserted before and to look on it in a new light. It allows us to say, now that I think of it, maybe I should have put it this way. Conversation is comfortable with contradictions. So now may we be allowed to suppose that Ignatius is in conversation with us in the first decade of the new century. Ignatius speaks. When I lean over the parapet to take a look at what Jesuits are up to, I am puzzled when I see myself. I mean, when I see what Jesuits have made of me. In this last half century, I feel like someone who has been dismantled and reassembled. I've become a congenial and warm-hearted member of a group of companions who are friends in the Lord. Well, fair enough. But it was not like that 50 years ago. Then I was stern, more than a little inhuman, a soldier, militaristic, an organizer of genius on soldierly lines, a martinet expecting prompt and unquestioning execution, a proposer of blind obedience, not greatly given to feeling or affection, rational, a man of steely willpower, hard in endurance, with a sensibility, if there was any of that there at all, under control, heroic. That was it. I was a hero. People need heroes. I suppose every generation recreates its heroes in its own image. Religious orders are no exception. The stern and strong-willed man had a long run for his money. That image may have helped many a man alone in the jungle or in the boredom of the classroom. It was the picture, by and large, that was dominant since our society was restored 1814 and re-established under Friar General Jan Ruthven 1829 to 53. It goes even further back to the time of Friar Claudio Acquaviva 1581 to 1615, and even earlier. The first published biography, the one Friar Pedro Ribadeneira, who had lived and worked closely with me, wrote with enthusiasm soon after I died. Did not please, and a new biography was commissioned. Footnote 2. 2 below all of this. Ribadeneira appointed himself as Ignatius' Boswell, inside and outside the house, within the city and away from it. I was never away from his side on every occasion. I couldn't, noticing all his manners, sayings, and actions, quoted in Jose Ignacio Talachia y de Goras, Ignatius of Loyola, the Pilgrim Saint, Chicago, 1984, page 8. It is surprising then that Ignatius chose Luis Goncalves da Camara to record his story. In 1567, Borgia requested, here's another footnote there, but in 1567, Borgia requested that all the manuscript copies of da Camara's text be sent to Rome. Borgia wanted whatever was published to be edifying. It seems fairly certain that the first chapter, the story of the saints' sins, was shredded. Goras says that Ribadeneira's biography was selective. He omitted the confession of sins to a layman at Pamplona, so he left that out, which appears in the autobiography. Goras says that Ribadeneira omitted what would have shown Ignatius' independence from the social and political environment of his age. Pilgrim Saint 23. First published biography, the one Friar Pedro Ribadeneira, who had lived and worked closely with me, wrote with enthusiasm soon after I died. Did not please, and a new biography was commissioned. It was around that time that Friar General Francis Borgia required all the manuscripts, copies of the stories of his pilgrimage, or my pilgrimage, to be returned to Rome. You were already painting an official portrait that was composed through the lens of what you saw yourself to be. I cannot say I recognize myself. We don't know ourselves too well, do we? Certainly we do not know what people are going to make of us when we are gone. You have only to listen to any group relating what happened last week to hear the disparate versions of the same event. It makes you wonder, doesn't it? There are axes to grind. You wonder at the way history gets written. The newer version of me, the Inigo one, the one that has grown since you began to go back to reflect on the beginnings of it all, since, say, the 1960s, is softer than the older picture. That document that Friar da Camara put together, from what he remembered of my telling him how God had dealt with my soul, what you often call my autobiography, when it wasn't, was it? Has been mulled over a lot these last 40 years. I'm well aware that that has been done with affection. What you have discovered by looking at so many more of my writings, my letters, and the fragments of my spiritual journal that has survived, along with comments made by my contemporaries, is a man of feeling, often given to tears, of daring imagination, something of a dreamer, a man of sensitive self-awareness, attending to the subtle movements of sensibility, a man of strong emotions with a gift for friendship and affection. You have even noticed that they used to hear shared laughter coming from my office. I observed that you often like to bring into your homilies, or God help us, your annual panegyrics, the time recorded by Friar Diego Lainez. The busy general was observed at prayer. He used to go up to the terrace where he could see the open sky. He would stand there and take off his hat. Without stirring, he would fix his eyes on the heavens for a short while. Then, sinking to his knees, he would make a lowly gesture of reverence. After that, he would sit on a bench, for his body's weakness did not permit him to do otherwise. There he was, head uncovered, tears running down drop by drop, in such sweetness and silence that not a sob, no sigh, no noise, no movement of body was noticed. Footnote 4. Pedro de Ribadeneira, Vita Ignatius Loyola, ed Candidus Dominus, etc. This work is cited by Charles E. O'Neill, S.J., in his Academiento Ignatian Reverence in History and in Contemporary Culture, Studies in the Spirituality of Jesuits, 8, number 1, January 1967, semicolon 7. Well, you have to admit that that is not like the older picture. It is not as though this is a touching up of an old canvas, a shadowing here, a raising of a colour there, but, as it seems to me, quite a different picture, a reversal of almost everything in the old. The fact of the difference raises a few questions for you. At least I hope it does. How do you know you have a true picture of me? Clearly, the two pictures are incomplete. There is a good deal of truth in both. Most of us are a bundle of contradictions anyway, and I had more than my fair share of them. Your sense of history tells you that neither interpretation is the whole story. And footnote 5, along with footnote 6. You have been learning how quite soon after I died, even some of my closest fellow workers and friends were giving a helping hand to some of the myths. They could not resist the temptation to beat the soldierly drum. My brief brush with soldiering was useful for seeing me in later years as military, not to say militant. And they, some of them perhaps to enlarge me or to make me more important than I really was, liked to see drama in the confrontation of two giants, Luther and Ignatius, and those two footnotes. 5. According to Idigoras, Ribadeneira characterized Ignatius as a closed-tongued, guarded Basque who was mysterious and enigmatic, one who consciously hid himself behind masks, giving a certain equivocation to his words and actions. Pilgrim Saint 23 and 11. 6. John W. O'Malley, S.J., The First Jesuits, Cambridge, 1993. Well, really, I can't say I see myself in that kind of light. That particular piece of theatre has distorted people's perceptions of the scope and purpose of the company, at least as I saw it. You still find the distortion repeated in the history books as though it were established fact. We aspired to be less than and more than simply agents of what you used to call the Counter-Reformation. You were already, so soon, doing what all organisations and nations like to do, composing a picture that flatters them. They wanted to present an image of what they would like to be. Soon, admiration and desire get to work. And now that you have made my exercises, other influences insinuate themselves. Friar Geronimo Nadal said that my narration of God's working in me was truly to form the order. Footnote 7. Below. Luis González de Camara Este acta patris Ignati Infantes narrative de D5 Ignatius de Loyola, FN Volume 1, Edition Dionysius Fernandez Zapico Candidus de Dalmasis and Peter Leturia, Volume 66 of the MHSI, Rome, 1951, 361.